Most financial advisors follow the industry playbook. Elite advisors choose a different path. I'm Sten Morgan. Welcome to the Elite Financial Advisor Podcast, where top advisors share the strategies, mindsets, and the stories behind building a better business, adding more value, and the courage to grow through resistance. Because becoming an elite advisor is not about working harder and longer. It's about choosing a better path.
I too was the contrarian. I was the one asking the questions. I'll never forget one of my sales managers who literally must have watched Glenn Ross every morning to get fired up because he totally inhabited Alec Baldwin's character. He would practice those speeches. I knew he did. He would beat on the table. And I remember him saying, "Maurer, stop asking questions. Just go out and sell." A guide is somebody who is going to be there walking beside the client. You're on the same level. You're not smarter than, you're not better than. You're working together in order to discern and then articulate what's most important to those people. And you've already kind of illuminated this. I believe that will always be the advisor of the future.
Welcome to this episode of the Elite Financial Advisor Podcast. Today, we're going to be hanging out with Tim Maurer. You're going to love his energy. And I appreciate our conversation about just what does it look like to actually enjoy your job as an advisor. And he has a great line that says, if you're not enjoying your job, you might not be doing it right. So let's get deep into what's the future of financial advice look like and what can advisors be doing today to develop themselves to grow more effectively. It's not just do average activity harder and longer, but how do you be more strategic? Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Sten. Pleasure to be here.
You bet. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about advisor growth. I feel like there's an element of the industry tells you a certain way to grow, which is just sell better, have better scripts, and that works to some degree. But I find top level advisors, like they usually do it different than kind of the industry standard. So we'll dive into that. But I'd love to know, how did you get into this industry?
The hard way, I would say. Yeah, it was
Nice.
It was still the 1990s, Sten. Do you remember those? You probably have some musicians that you still listen to from that era that now call classic rock, I believe. That really makes you feel old when the things that you grew up with in high school are now considered classic rock, like Pearl Jam and Nirvana. But yeah, it was the 1990s. And the truth is, I didn't even know. I was a finance major, and I might have had one personal finance class in my entire degree at Towson University. As much as I love my alma mater, it's one of the reasons I went back to teach at my alma mater, the fundamentals of financial planning, because I wanted to teach the class I never got a chance to take. But with relatively limited information, I don't think I knew exactly who was doing this financial planning and wealth management thing, or at least who was doing it the best. And the ones that presented themselves were, and I think this is kind of somewhat similar to your history, it was banks, brokerage firms, and insurance companies. And there are a ton of great people and a ton of great advisors that I've met through that experience. But quite frankly, as I got into it, I was scratching my head. I'm like, well, where's the professional version of this thing? It was all about product and setting up a sale to sell a transactional product. And in financial planning was ancillary, if anything else. So I cut my teeth beating my head against a wall and, quite frankly, succeeding, meaning managing to survive, which is challenging enough in that space. And even, winning occasional contests and all that, I'm competitive enough that I'll play the game, as it were. But I was really starting to lose heart on what I believed this can be, what this work really, really can be, which is directly connecting with people on a more human level and having the privilege of having a benefit in their life by offering them some of the financial insight that we've gained through our education and experience. And so it took me some time, but the first 7 or so years were spent in the industry proper, as I went literally from each of the big proprietary 3 types of companies and trying to find which one of them was doing the best financial planning. Ultimately, I found, like you, the RIA space, where I found a different world and a professional approach to what we do.
Yeah. What did you think financial advising was early on? What was your experience? How did you even think this is a business I want to be in? You just liked your finance classes, or did you know somebody that was an advisor and you're like, that looks good?
Well, I'll tell you, in the 8th grade, new kid moved into the neighborhood, and he moved into the house that had 3 garage bays, not 2 like mine, and there were European vehicles in said garage bays. And I remember walking up to his house as an 8th grader and knocking on the door to quote unquote welcome him to the neighborhood. It was really like, hey, what's your dad do? And so I think I declared my major in the 8th grade, but for all the wrong reasons, right? I got into this business because I figured that being in the money business was a great way to make money. It was a very infantile approach to what we do. And it took getting into the business to realize that simply was not sufficient motivation. I needed to find a deeper reservoir of a mission to draw for the work that we do.
Yeah. Well, I got tricked into an internship. It was the only one that was going to pay me $100 a week to show up. So I was like, sure, I'll learn to sell insurance.
Well, I did ask some questions, and I'm not going to name the company who was the first to make me an offer, but they made it so fast. I was like, why in the world would you be willing to put financial advisor or financial consultant or some derivation thereof on a business card for some, 20-something that looks like he's still a teenager and doesn't know anything yet? I didn't totally understand that, Sten. But as you know, like that's how a lot of the business works. They throw everybody up against the wall. They see who sticks. They take all of the clients in that 250 person list of friends and family that we're all asked to do, and they keep what happens, and the people who succeed. It's the way that a lot of that business worked, and a lot of it still does, quite frankly. But I was definitely scratching my head even at that early point, wondering why in the world would you give me a job in this business if I haven't actually learned anything yet?
Yeah, well, that's fair. I think about, I'm spending more time these days thinking about like, where's our industry going? Like what's the avatar of the future 10 years from now? Does that advisor at a high level look back and look at what we were doing, product focus, and say, what were you like? That's crazy. Or is our industry so big and the momentum is so big and the products are so profitable that it's like, it's always going to kind of look like it does. But if you want to excel, you're going to have to try to do something different than the mainstream.
Sten,
what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really great question. And, I kiddingly mentioned my motivation as an 8th grader being relatively immature. The true vision that I was drawn to, even in the 1990s, was this notion of being a trusted advisor, right? Mm-hmm. Being that pillar in the community that people could look to, somebody who would employ empathy. So from a very, very early age, from a professional perspective, that is the vision that I had. What I realized about 7 years in is that I had fallen in love with a commercial for a bunch of big financial companies that they had psychologists employed to know how they wanted to project themselves. The challenge that I had was in finding people who were actually doing the work that way. And very early on, like in the late 90s and early 2000s, the RIA space was tiny. And you had to basically go to one of the proprietary companies, survive that gauntlet first so that you could substantiate coming over to an RIA with a handful of clients, because none of them were really even big enough to be hiring like associate advisors. And so you and I, even in the phase of our careers, we don't even have to be in the future looking back on it. I've been in this business long enough that I look back on it now and I'm still saying that's kind of crazy. But in talking to tons and tons of advisors out there are still a lot of people who were going about this business that way, and people who are going about business development that same antiquated way.
Yeah. With the industry, I look back as somewhat of a contrarian by nature. I was kind of always asking questions of the firms I was with that are big, and it was like, hey, just do it the way you're supposed to. And so there was enough of something in me that was like, I want to go try this. I want to try that. Not everyone has the risk tolerance to do that. You kind of like, I'm going to plug in here and try to learn the business and make enough money until I can afford to step back and evaluate my career. But I know I met a bunch of great advisors there that, selling this person a term insurance actually probably was good for them. Like they're better off than they were without it. But it was hard for me as I was in that business longer, and people kept saying financial planning. I'm a financial planner. And I was like, you might be, but I'm not doing financial planning.
Yeah.
Like as I realized what planning really was and how comprehensive it could be, I had to self-admit, which I think was kind of emotional in a way, of I'm selling investments and I'm selling insurance, period.
Yeah.
I should probably stop telling people they have a financial plan because they don't know enough to question me. They're like, oh, I must have a financial plan. So how did you, early on, were you like, I know what true deep financial planning is? Or did you have to go through a similar process of like, wait, what am I doing here?
Similar process. I too was the contrarian. I was the one asking the questions. I'll never forget one of my sales managers who literally must have watched Glenn Ross every morning to get fired up because he totally inhabited Alec Baldwin's character. He would practice those speeches. I knew he did. He would beat on the table. And I remember him saying, Maurer, stop asking questions. Just go out and sell. And I mean, it was almost comical. Like a lot of people, they hear these stories, Sten, and they'd have to have been in your shoes, my shoes, or others' shoes in order to believe it's actually true. But that is precisely how it was. And so, no, I think I'd originally fallen in love with the vision, right? I almost just had a whiff or a sense of what a trusted advisor could be, but I certainly didn't know how to do it. I will say that one of the big revelatory moments or phases of my career for me is when I actually took the Certified Financial Planner coursework. Because prior to that, I was just piling up the licenses, the Series 7, the 6, the 63, the 55, life and health, property and casualty. And I think part of that was my earnest pursuit of where is this business? What is this business actually, aside from just selling people or convincing people? And through the CFP coursework, for the first time, I found what I thought was truly applicable counsel. So much of the licensing exams I thought were just rote regurgitation of laws and stuff like that. All stuff that's probably important, but it wasn't stuff that was guiding how I was actually working. So it definitely shaped me coming through the CFP coursework, scrolling down on that screen with tears in my eyes, hoping I was going to see the response that I wanted to see because I had two young kids at home and didn't think I had time to go back and study to take that test again.
You only want to do that one once.
No, sir. So I do feel like that was formative for me in helping define what the profession was. And at that point in time, that contrarian nature combined with that new knowledge of, heck, there really is a profession, there really is a craft to be practiced. I mean, kind of was a dangerous combination, and I've been beating that drum ever since.
Turn them loose. I get this question from young advisors all the time, like, do I need to take the CFP? And I look back at my story. I took it like the first year in the business. I couldn't even tell people I had it yet.
Yeah.
But it was just a confidence boost. And I believe, and this is something we teach at our events and when I'll speak, is the advisor of the future is a coach, an encourager, like a dynamic communicator. Like you are going to inspire people to take action. And I think these are skill sets that I avoided early on as an advisor. I just wanted to sell better. And selling better was like, I'm just going to explain this thing more technically and overwhelm them with facts, and eventually I'll convince them. And then I looked around and I was like, man, some of the most successful advisors aren't the most technical advisors.
Yeah.
Like they are good at these nuances that I hadn't naturally had. So I'm curious, obviously, as you speak now, you do a lot of this polished, connecting with somebody. Was that just who you were, or were you more of a technical person that had to like open up to be more of a coach in a way?
Yeah, that was a process for me too, Sten. And what really happened is, if you remember me saying that once I found the true profession, I was inspired enough to go back and teach the class I never got a chance to take. That is really where I got all my chops: public speaking, creativity, of connecting with people, and coaching for sure. So for 7 years, every semester, I'd have 30 to 40 kids who I was trying to breathe life into, and they would show up and I would ask them day one, all right, who here is here because you want to be, not because you have to be? And normally only 20% of the class would raise their hand and say they were there because they wanted to be. So I knew at that point, especially, it was my job to change the way that this interaction was going to take place. And so I really took on the posture of a coach as a teacher, because I was looking for ways to get those students to light up, to actually learn, not just to get the grade. And it was some of the lowest paying, highest rewarding work that I have ever done as a lowly adjunct faculty member. And I could not recommend it more highly for someone who's trying to really get involved in public speaking or practicing communication. And certainly, I do agree on a coaching level. I think that a guide is one of the best metaphors. Teacher, I think is an insufficient metaphor. I used to use that metaphor, but it's an inherently condescending metaphor, right? You're the teacher up top speaking to 30, 40, however many people. And so there's inherently condescending posture there. Consultant, I don't think is a perfect metaphor, because what do consultants do? They come in, they tell you what's wrong, charge you a big bill, and then they leave. A guide is somebody who is going to be there walking beside the client. You're on the same level. You're not smarter than, you're not better than. You're working together in order to discern and then articulate what's most important to those people. And you've already kind of illuminated this. I believe that will always be the advisor of the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's the practical part. You know, I think to be a good advisor, you have to be organized. You know, you're essentially running a business. Like there's some attention to detail. This could be a risky business. You're dealing with people's money. But you've done a lot of work in like the behavioral science side of this, which are kind of, I think, some of these more intimidating skills. Let's wade into that a little bit. Like,
absolutely.
Yes, you have to do all the blocking and tackling of being a good business owner and a good advisor. You have to know what you're doing. But what about this over here? That let's say this will end up being what separates the most trusted, successful advisors in the future that people connect with and feel known, versus this person just feels like they're just telling me what to do and trying to sell me something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to deliver it to your advisor audience the way it was delivered to me. I had the opportunity years ago to interview Richard Thaler. He is the economist at the University of Chicago who effectively discovered Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work and brought it into the mainstream economics. Those guys were really on the fringe, even as the founding fathers of behavioral economics. Thaler was the one who coined the term behavioral economics, and he's the one who probably only 3 or 4 people can refer to Danny Kahneman, or referred to as Kahneman has now since passed. But nonetheless, I had the opportunity to interview him, and I asked him, what is the number one piece of advice that you would give financial advisors? And he said, I don't know if we've got a bleep machine on here. He said, know your S word, right?
Sure,
you've heard the phrase before. We've heard the phrase before. I translated it for Money Magazine as know your stuff. And then he followed up by saying, look, if a financial advisor didn't know the difference between a stock and a bond, they'd be considered a fraud. But in his opinion, at that point in time, most financial advisors couldn't really aptly articulate the difference between, say, system 1 and system 2, the two operating systems in the brain. The one's the emotional core processor, system 1, and the system 2 is the slower, more rational, thoughtful processor in our brains.
Sure.
The truth of the matter is, you know this stuff. We're speaking oftentimes in the wrong dialect for our clients to understand what we're talking about. They're making decisions from the place of system 1, the emotional core processor, which is the domain of more than 80% of the decisions that we make. We're speaking in system 2, that technician language that you referenced. Yes, we must be capable technicians as just a table stakes in order to even get the chance to do this unbelievable work that we have the privilege of doing. But we're really in a system 1 business. The technical knowledge, in my opinion, will always just be the table stakes. And thank God for the advent of AI and other things that are continuing to improve the efficiency with which we can navigate all the technical. That's fantastic. That doesn't scare me at all, because it leaves us more space to be doing that higher value work, which is getting to know human beings and then having the education, the experience, and ultimately the wisdom to offer them guidance that is genuinely valuable.
Yeah. So what does that look like in practice? Is that you just know the right questions to open with to set the tone? Is it you know how to take something that can be complicated and make it feel personal with story? How does this practically play out for advisors?
Well, how it looks in practice is we need to practice. That's one of the ironic twists about this, right? I don't know if you were an athlete growing up, you look like an athletic guy, but I grew up in sports, and nobody would ever think about just going out to the game to play the state championship of lacrosse in Maryland and not have a practice beforehand. But how often do we as advisors simply read an article, listen to a fantastic podcast like this or any other of the great podcasts out there, and then think, oh, I've got it? We're not naturally just going to apply something that we've learned just because we've read a book or listened to a podcast. I believe we need to be actively practicing what we are doing. And I believe that there's no degree of experience that will suggest that we don't need to keep practicing. I think intellectual curiosity, something that we will always be fostering throughout the course of our careers, is the number one trait for financial advisors, because we will never know everything we need to know about the human condition. And that is really the business that we are in. So yes, let's take in all the information we can. There's plenty of raw knowledge that we don't know, but then we need to move from raw knowledge to application. Right? Application. And that's where a lot of this practice comes in, from application, then to critical thinking. Now that we know the rules, we know how to apply them. Now we know when and how they can and should be broken or bent. And then at the very top of that pyramid, in terms of advisor development, that's where I put coaching. And that's where we go from transformations from one level in our career to that epiphany that takes us to that next place in our careers.
Yeah, think about the process we use at my firm now. And there's an element of, when I meet you, I want to inspire you. I want to call you up to something. Because if I don't create urgency, you're probably just going to go back to doing what you're doing before. And I think a lot of advisors miss if it's like, hey, you should fund this Roth or increase your 401k contribution or buy this insurance. Technically, that's probably true, but you haven't told me why. You haven't made me feel something on wow, there's an urgency. I can retire 5 years earlier. What would I do with that time? Painting this picture of with me as your guide, we can get where you want to go. Then I think I had to give myself permission when the financial planning, if those take 2 to 3 months for us to build and put a client through a process, that's the technical time. That's when I get to be in the office, crunching numbers and working on things. And that doesn't need as much of the client. But then I have to channel the other energy at delivery to inspire them to actually do it.
Yes.
And so as you think about that process, there is this technical piece, but when it comes to client facing, and it feels like the energy I have to channel is this inspirational coach, because the force of maintaining their current posture is pretty strong unless something dramatic happens.
Yeah.
And what if the advisor has to be the catalyst to shake them up to actually do something different?
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you also said something else that I don't know that I'd thought about it in these terms, but it's absolutely true. At the beginning of an engagement with a client, something has shaken them up, right? And it's probably been a life event or a life transition. It could have been something that's great. It could be a new job that they absolutely love. It could be that they're moving. It could be that they're getting married or divorced. Who knows what it might be? But there's almost always some sort of trigger. And I think that we all like to think of ourselves as client-centric advisors, but what does that actually mean? And so I love your idea of early on in that engagement, it's not a game, it's a conversation. But if we're skillful enough to open the door, and I like starting open-ended and as broad as humanly possible. I don't think there's a perfect question, although there are a few questions that I like for prompts to help open the door. But I like to think of it almost as the goal is to identify what was it that was that person's red flag that caused them to work with me in the first place. Because if we don't connect on that level, it means we're not satisfying that initial curiosity that drove them to take the very courageous step of working, probably reaching out to 2, 3, 4 different prospective new financial advisors, right? That's a lot of discomfort for somebody to experience. So if we haven't identified what that chief red flag was that brought them in the door in the first place, we probably haven't been truly client-centric. And if we have identified it, and then we've provided the solution that will help satisfy the angst that they had about that, then yes, that does lay out the stage for us to take those additional steps as we develop their broader financial plan. But I love where you started with that. It's kind of like we do want a point of traction at the outset of a relationship. And I personally believe the best way to do that is to determine what is the most important thing, or what's that trigger that brought them through the door. Let's satisfy that, and then let's move on from there. I love the idea of starting open-ended, personal, getting technical, broadening out the plan, and then developing that ongoing rhythm of kind of a healthy coach approach to wealth management.
As you're hanging out with advisors, what are you trying to encourage them with obviously financial planning? You believe in that. Is what gets you fired up the most these days is how do you connect with a client and get them to take action?
Oh, it is.
What's the thing that gets you the most excited?
Yeah. I think that'll always be it, because the truth is, if we allow this business to be so, it can become a little rote. right? Oftentimes there's a great deal of excitement at the beginning of a client relationship where we're attempting to develop that fit and make it stick. And oftentimes there's a lot of great work that's done in that first, say, 6 to 18 months with a client. But all too often, even some of the best advisors fall prey to that rote rhythm. It's really truly a rut of like, now we're just talking about quarterly investment performance against an arbitrary benchmark. It's like, that is not particularly life-giving, at least for me.
That's fair. No. Yeah.
And so I love the idea of what is it, George Kinder uses the phrase lighting the torch. And that is the idea of finding that connectivity at the very front end of an engagement on a very personal level. But I like the idea then of also fanning the flame over time. And that is a deep form of motivation to me. The way I think about it, every single one of our clients, and many of them are coupled, so they're families that we're serving, they're all unique, right? And then they're also always changing. We too are unique and we are always changing and hopefully evolving. And so the idea is it's never the same conversation, Sten. And so I love the idea of figuring out how can we breathe life into this conversation? How can this be another compelling moment that may actually be the most important conversation that these clients have this particular year? I know that might sound a little bit outlandish, but why couldn't it be one of the most important conversations they have this year or this quarter? And when we think about it that way, the truth is this business should really never get old. And it starts to sound an awful lot like a dream job.
Sure. I mean, I'm challenged when you say that. I just had a situation where clients for 15 years, a dad and the 2 sons, all individual clients, and great work up front. They live in another state. There's a time zone difference, which we've navigated well over the years. Doesn't seem like there's an issue. And recently, feedback from them was like, hey, it feels like, this isn't what they said, but predictable. Our meetings aren't as long as they used to be. And as I heard you say that, I was like, I think what happened was like the practical, efficient business owner inside of me was like, oh, this is our rhythm. It works. You're getting all your questions answered. But to them, it's like I need to jolt it back to life periodically. And so I think for all the advisors listening, like think about your book. Like, is there a client where you're like, I think I've had the same meeting with them for the last 5 years in a row. And while productive and effective, maybe financially, has the connection been lost? Are they less excited? Do they feel less known? So that's very challenging because I'm a very practical person and it helps. But at times I think maybe the connection gets missed.
I appreciate your willingness to say it out loud. I mean, I know I have had that experience. And so when I say, what I'm about to say, I'm saying it to myself as well as every other advisor out there. And that is, if you're finding the work boring, you're probably not doing it right. And it doesn't mean that we're bad. It doesn't mean that we're bad advisors. Like I'm saying this to myself as well, because I've been in that same meeting, right? Where I know something needs to be shaken up. But when we think more, Brian Portnoy does a great job with the illustration of the technician and the guide, right? These 2 hats that we're always wearing. But one of the things that we've done at our company is we've bifurcated those roles. And so we have basically the technician team and the guide team. And for the guides, they know then what their job is. It's real clear. You're not going to get bogged down in the technician stuff. They're all experienced technicians, but they know that their job is to make sure that we are perpetually identifying what's most important to this family and how can we help point their worldly goods in the direction of serving those ends.
Man, great line. If you're not enjoying your job, you're probably not doing it right. I wonder if there's an element of like, if your job's frustrating, I mean, this is a tough job and I think we have frustrating days.
Absolutely.
But I do remember having to step back periodically and be like, if this just seems way too hard, like if this is frustrating, like, do I have to do it this way? And I think a lot of advisors, especially those part of big firms that we coach and speak at their events, there's an element of like, I have to do what everybody else is doing. And if I want to do better, I'll do it harder and longer than them.
Yeah.
And it's like, for everybody listening, like I free you of that. And I wish early on when I first got in the business, somebody would have said, hey, here's this door. And it's just a lot of activity for a long time. And eventually it might work out. But hey, just so you know, there's this door too.
Yeah.
But this door requires you to become a better speaker and communicator.
Yeah.
Requires you to like dive into your craft even more aggressively.
Yeah.
I just didn't even know the other door existed for a while. I was just like, oh, this is what everybody's doing. I have to do that too.
Man, I hope people heard that, and you might even want to repeat it, because that permission for advisors to be precisely who they are in this business and not who the business or their company or the structure of society, whatever, is kind of trying to mold them to be. I have seen some of the best advisors on the planet actually burn out because the systems in which they reside are not designed to handle their fullness. And it's a beautiful fullness, right? They, to me, are the advisors of the future. But if they're inside a system of the past, then oftentimes that is going to create a recipe for nothing short of burnout. And I even wrote about this recently. I think in many ways, our business is inclined to facilitate burnout. Unfortunately. We are the ones who need to hear the message that you just delivered, that we are free to pursue this thing however we choose. Ours is one of the least evolved businesses, I think, on the planet. And yet, I think even in one of your more recent episodes, you were noting that from a technological perspective, we're starting to see things change, right? The industry has purposefully held back on evolution for a long, long time, like hundreds of years, to hold on to the highest margins humanly possible. Now, I think we are starting to see the reins loosen on innovation and evolution. And so this should be the time for you as an advisor to find the system, the craft, in which you can really, really flourish. Because I genuinely believe that that whatever combination of technician and guide that you are, you can find the right place or create the right place to truly flourish and enjoy this work.
That's well said. I do look back, and there were times where I probably jumped ship too quick. And so for everybody listening, like leaving wherever you are tomorrow is maybe not the answer. But I do love the idea of like being open to what does the fullness of this industry look like to you. Because a system of efficiency and sales targets and trips may not fan that flame as fully as you want.
I love that too. And I do love the idea, by the way, of if you have a vision for something that is new, different, and better, in my opinion, you also have a responsibility to share that with the people that you're working with, right? Like all the better if you do have a visionary insight that you share that and allow the whole entity to evolve. If that's indeed what needs to happen. And so I definitely don't think step one should be, all right, see you later. I think step one should be deepening your understanding, probably going out and reading 3 to 5 different books on what it is that's really getting you fired up, and then sharing that insight with the people who could hold the power to make the changes or employ that innovation. Oftentimes, I think we just presume that the people who we think don't see it the same way, don't see it the same way. We may just not be having that conversation or that level of conversation. And so you could be the one to incite that conversation and maybe not have to do the massive amount of upheaval it is to actually truly leave a situation or start something from scratch and just improve a situation that's already existing.
Yeah, I think the good news I'm seeing firms, Edward Jones just approved financial planning for all their advisors. They're going to put their kind of box around it for a while. And so I see these big firms now trying to roll out a non-product focused, more of a process focused offering. It's been interesting though to see the advisors' responses to that change to where it's just like, we have no idea what to do next. Like a fear of it, people don't really want it. We're all getting in our way. And so it's been interesting to see. Obviously there's some early adopters of like, finally you're letting us do this.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing the big middle, the 60%, are just kind of at a loss of what's a process. Like, are they going to say no to the product? Man, this feels like a lot of work. And so we're trying to do a lot of work on like, how do you efficiently implement planning within your practice that's like very efficient, so therefore still profitable, and it doesn't feel like it's taking away or you're reinventing yourself fully. What are you seeing with that in the industry, and how would you encourage the people watching that are like, Tim, I love what you're saying, it just feels like I'd have to become a different person to be that kind of advisor?
My primary encouragement is you don't. And in many ways, what I've seen, there's always been a perception if I'm going to add planning kind of to the stack. And I want to come back to that point because I want to say something I think might actually be pretty funny in a second about that whole adding planning to financial advising. But we'll come back to that in a second. But to add planning feels like it might belabor the client experience or the overall process or systems, right? Adding more qualitative capacity and behavioral capacity within your planning to many people also feels like, oh, that's going to belabor the client experience. Now I'm going to have 7 meetings just to bring somebody on board. And I don't. There may be those who do think that it requires that level of depth, but I've really dedicated myself to trying to find the 80-20 version of this. What's the 20% of the effort that we can get the 80% of the benefit? So perhaps that's even another discussion for us to have on another day, because I genuinely believe that you don't have to belabor your process. There was a time when I started in this business, we asked people to come through the door with literally stacks of papers and documents that we were reading through. We don't have to do any of that crap anymore. So there is so much more space and time, especially with the advent of AI, man. I couldn't be more excited about that. You don't have to belabor your process. You may even be able to slim it down, because one of the biggest lessons I have learned is that less is so often more in our interaction with clients. They never wanted to learn everything that we learned in the first place, right? They want us to be a guide, even if they don't have language for that. Okay, but now let's come back to the funny piece. Because you said, yes, it is encouraging to see any corner of the industry evolve. By all means, I'm all for it. But do you remember, it might have only been like 5 or 7 years ago, McDonald's had a commercial on television. They said something about the fact that now the chicken nuggets were 100% made of chicken. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
What were they?
When you talk to clients, I've talked to people like peers, right, who just aren't financial advisors, and had the conversation about the word fiduciary. And they're all like, wait, you mean everybody doesn't have to work in the best interest of the client? Like, they just assumed that the chicken nuggets actually only had chicken in them, or that financial advisors were only financial planners. But but I guess we'll just keep evolving instead.
Well said. No, that's good. I appreciate the humor and the honesty in that. Well, Tim, I appreciate you, man. We'll definitely have to get back together. There's a lot to talk about here, but yeah, for everybody listening, the industry is shifting. How are you shifting and leveling up? And there's a human element, a coach, an encourager, like you said, a guide element to it that I think every advisor in the future has to unleash, channel, develop. The technical is great, but I think we're moving somewhere else where the technical is less important with all the AI.
Yes. Well, and I'll say only this, Sten. Yes, I do believe we have to. I believe we must, but I think even more importantly, we get to. I promise you this work is even more enjoyable when you take these steps. We can't make very many promises in this business, but I do promise. If you deepen your understanding of your fellow humans, you're going to better understand yourself, you're going to be a better spouse, you're going to be a better parent, you're going to be a better human, and you're going to be a better financial advisor.
Well said. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Sten.